Support for the podcast comes from Open Minds Psychological with locations in Plymouth Meeting and Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Open Minds works with individuals to support needs around emotional regulation, anxiety, depression, trauma, and coping skill development. They also offer psychological evaluations to assess developmental, cognitive, academic, and behavioral needs, high-risk assessment, as well as career counseling. Evidence-informed group therapy options are offered periodically throughout the year around topics such as anxiety awareness and skill building, social skill development, ADHD and executive function coaching, as well as parent support groups. Learn more at openmindpsychological.com. Hello, and welcome back to Parenting Stuff I Wish I Knew Sooner and Want You to Know Now. I'm your host, Erica Desper, the founder of the Center for Confident Parenting and a mom who seemed to learn everything I needed to know the hard way. My guest today is Maude LeRoux, an occupational therapist and the founder of A Total Approach, where she and her team of providers offer unique assessment and intervention protocols not found anywhere else by chasing the why behind each child's developmental and behavioral challenges, knowing that intervention's more successful when targeted as close as possible to the origin of the challenge. Maude, thank you for joining me.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm very excited. Plus, I just love your accent, so this will be a lovely, lovely podcast. Tell our listeners a bit about yourself and what brought you to do this type of work.
No, that's a long story. Do we have 3 months?
You might have to narrow it down.
No, but I'll just shortly, I'm an occupational therapist. And so for me, the big deal is function. I want the child to be able to get to a good place of being. I want the family to feel empowered with how they understand their child. And basically, I was a late bloomer. I kind of did my young thing by just doing all kinds of fun stuff until I decided, okay, I need to become more serious. So my serious OT career probably started in the late 90s, and it just exploded. You know, I was just involved in so many, I wanted to learn everything. And still today, I'm on a training course every month of my life. It's just been a wonderful, wonderful journey, but so much out there for us to learn and to be able to get there. So I opened the practice in 2001. Simply because I didn't really want to work for somebody else. I wanted to do what I wanted to do with kids. And I wanted to be my own little out-of-the-box thinker. And I didn't want to comply to other people's rules. So here I am.
Wonderful, wonderful. I feel like occupational therapists are magicians. You know so much about so much. There's no other way to say it. And I remember when I was, first learning, I was like, what does that even mean? Occupational therapy for a child, like what is their occupation? But now I've come to understand, and you can add to this if you want, it's really just everything they need to do throughout daily life, mainly playing, but all the other things that they need to do. It really is like, it's just all encompassing. It's very, very cool. And we, of course, have a lot of experience in our family with occupational therapy. I feel like my son's been in it for a very long time, which is not always the case, but he had a lot of challenges to work through. So we appreciate all occupational therapists.
But I think, Erica, maybe just a little piece here of disclaimer,
go for it.
There are different OT frames out there, Educational OT may look very different from clinical OT. Yes. And that may look different than a rehab OT or a work performance OT. So there's OT has their fingers in all kinds of different occupations, and especially in pediatric care, school care, the arenas. The clinical OT is much more of a developmental OT. Mm-hmm. The frame is developmental theory and practice, whereas educational OT is performance-based inside of the occupation of being able to take in from the least restrictive environment in the school system. So they will be different, and oftentimes there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about where OT can be applied best.
That's really interesting because early in our journey, before we really knew what was going on with our son, the only diagnosis we had was a sensory processing disorder, which was making his school days really overwhelming for him. Mm-hmm. And so the school OT would pull him out for a short time and do whatever she was doing with him. And she came to me at one point and said, I'm not going to pull him out anymore because I don't know what to do for him. So I wonder if that's now, I should have fought that. I'm learning myself. But I wonder if that's an example of what you were saying. Our clinic OTs were saying, here's what's going on and here's what we can do. But the school OT was saying, like, I don't really know how to help him in this setting. And so it's not worth the time of pulling him out. And I was like, why are these two people so far apart? But what you're saying kind of speaks to that, I think.
No, it's very true. And really, I have the greatest respect for school OTs because they often have a very they want to do so much because we don't get to this kind of a job without needing to help people. We want to help. And I absolutely think there are amazing school OTs there that actually can blend both the clinical and the educational. And there's others out there who would want to do more, but the system doesn't allow them to do more. That
Mm-hmm.
the expectation is that they are related service to the IEP team and to the school education team, and they must relate their services towards where the child is missing the opportunity of learning alongside their peers.
Right.
And so the whole piece about educational OT can often be very accommodative in its orientation, accommodating for the pencil grip, accommodating for the
Mm-hmm.
seated position, accommodating for I need to take a break. And it's true that then also they don't have the same kind of training that clinical OTs are. You know, we're private practice.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't stay on top of our game with exactly what is going on there,
Right.
there's a problem here, right? So
Right.
we learn more, we go on more courses, we our training is just part of the game of a clinical OT. You got to keep up,
Mm-hmm.
and so therefore there is a space where the educational OT say, I don't know what to do. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not a personal slant, and it's not because
Right.
they don't want to. It's simply that they just don't have that purview, and they don't
Right.
have that background, and it doesn't warrant the school educational system. It doesn't warrant all of this clinical OT training if you're going to be working in education as the occupation. Whereas clinical OT, we're looking at sport as an occupation, we're looking at school as an occupation, play as an occupation, leisure activity as an occupation, social as an occupation, sleep as an
I
occupation
was just
piece.
going to say, I've learned from the other hat I wear as a sleep and potty coach. Yeah, sleeping, peeing, pooping. Sometimes those are the occupation we're focusing on, and kids
That's
run
right.
into trouble with that too, as silly as it sounds. Yeah, so it sounds like what I hear you saying, whereas a school OT might look to accommodate a funky pencil grip or a pencil grip that's compensating, you guys would be
Yeah,
looking for, like, why is that happening in the first place? Is it gross motor, maybe leading to fine motor, and then we work on that. So it's just a little deeper, again, getting to the why behind the issue versus just trying to sort of rig things so the child can work through the issue. Yeah,
absolutely.
that makes a
Absolutely.
lot of sense. I'm glad you stopped me there. That was really helpful. And I mean, I'm doing this show for everyone else, but I always relate it back to our experience and go, like, oh, now I understand why she said that. So this is a little bit for me too. We're all learning together. There is a quote that parents probably have often heard me say from Ross Green, that children do well when they can. And his thought is that behavioral challenges are just the visible symptom, the only piece that we can see that indicates under the surface, kind of like the tip of the iceberg. You can just see that little piece, but there's so much underneath. And what's underneath, according to Dr. Green, is either a lagging skill or an unmet need. I believe that your version of that saying is, if a child could, they would. Can
Mhm.
you elaborate on that? What do you mean when you say that?
There is no child that's born in this world that says, I'm going to become a behavior. I'm going to have trouble at school, right? We're not born that way. What we are born to do is to have a nervous system that can operate in a way that we can feel functional, that we can feel productive, and we can partake in our communities wherever we are. And so we have a natural inclination to grow, a natural want to reach out, to attach to our caregiver, to say, hey, teach, what you got for me today? That's a natural piece, right? But when I have developmental delay, I shy away from that natural bend towards that piece because I first have to make sure if I put myself out there, am I going to feel safe? Am I going to feel like I can produce? I can be where you want me to be.
Mm-hmm.
So, what a child then does is they use their nervous system they know there's a weakness somewhere, but they don't know what to call it, and they don't know that their bodies are different than the kid next to them. So what they start doing is that they build in protective mechanisms, and those protective mechanisms can look like shutdown
Mm-hmm.
on a severe end, could look like simply saying, I'm out of here, whether
Which
in
could be
mind or in
called
body.
resistance or refusal
That's
or
right. Aggression,
oppositional
you know,
defiance.
that's right. All of the above, right? Those behaviors, I think, and the word behavior becomes a little sort of niggle in my system because behavior is behavior, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be always negative when we think about behavior, and especially for the child. If we start seeing the behavior as the child's need for protecting against their vulnerabilities, it changes the whole place of, if I could, I would.
Mhm.
That when I have to contend with this body that's taking in all these mixed messages. Here comes my auditory and there comes my vision, and what the teacher is showing and telling does not come out the same way. So I'm going to shut down my auditory and just look, or I'm going to look out of the window and just listen. But that looks distracted. No, no, look at me, right? And then all of these little behaviors start making sense when you think about the child's adaptive response is at work and they're trying their best to do what they have. But unfortunately, if you only focus on the surface behavior,
Mhm.
then it becomes like, well, I know he's got the intelligence. He knows what he's doing. I know they got what I asked them to do. Why aren't they doing it? It must be stubborn. It must be willful. No,
Yeah.
children would love to please us.
Yeah.
They would love to please themselves. There's no one who wants to feel out of control. There's no one who doesn't want to feel like, I can't be productive. I can't be a part of this group. We
Mhm.
want to belong. It's a natural inclination to want to belong. But when I pull out of that belonging, it's oftentimes looking at, why is that pulling out the adaptive strategy that that child is using at that point?
Mhm.
And then we chase the why.
Right.
And so for me, it is, I'm going to trust that this child is coming to me with everything he's got. He's got his full little suitcase with him or with her. And they're coming into that door and they're telling me, okay, here I am. But I need to know, are you going to be safe or not? And
Right.
then when you pull them in and you relate with them and you help them to see that, whatever you bring to me today, buddy, is going to be good enough for me. And then
Mhm.
when you do that, they relax. And when they relax, then we start pushing a little bit so that we can
Right.
get a little bit more of that risk taking behavior that every typical child out there is taking for granted.
Yeah. And I would want this to sound like a relief to parents. I think if we're seeing, or even teachers, if we're seeing the surface behaviors as this child is giving me a hard time, everything after that is through the lens of that. We make a lot of assumptions. We do punishments, we do consequences. Whereas if we can shift to seeing this child having a hard time and why, then we're looking through that lens and we can,
That's right.
maybe make some progress with them. And it's really
Yeah.
hard. I mean, it's definitely easier said than done, and we talk about this a lot on this show. But yes, they're not giving you a hard time; they're having a hard time. And then I just want to stress this piece about safety. I've learned a lot of what you're talking about already, but if another parent hasn't, I could hear them maybe hearing this and saying this to themselves, like, what do they mean? Of course my child is safe. Like, what is Maude saying? That, we have an unsafe home environment, right? Or something's happening in school that's not safe. But just to clarify, you mean that, like, within their body, because of what they're processing through their senses, their nervous system is kind of kicking into high gear, and it's that sort of unsafe feeling of, I need to protect myself from all of this input. It's not
That's right.
like unsafe the way we might think of it, right?
Yeah. The biggest analogy I can give you is, remember when you learned to drive a car the first time and you got behind that wheel and you had to put your foot on the gas pedal, and then you had to put the foot on the brake pedal, and then you had to judge the distance between cars, and then you had to make sure you're steering all right, and you can't look down at your feet because you have to look in the road, and then the people said, stop, stop, you missed the stop sign, I just want to sort of simulate all that
Mm-hmm.
anxiety we went through that
Right.
first time, right?
And you could
So
have someone very supportive in the seat beside you, very calm, very
absolutely.
loving, but you
It,
still have that feeling like, oh my gosh, this is not okay.
That's right. Now, our kids with sensory needs come to school every day with that.
Mm-hmm.
And where you and I, with a typical nervous system, can learn to adapt to this new learning, and it can become habitual for us, so that now we can drive a car without thinking about how we're driving. We're thinking about the dentist appointment. We're thinking about where we're going to. So we're freeing up our mind because the body is taking care of the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's what our kids don't have with sensory developmental delay. And it's an internal thing. If I broke my arm, you know I can't use it.
Right.
But how do you know that the nervous system is a little bit broken inside,
Right.
right?
You wouldn't say
And
like, stop giving me a hard time, put your shirt on.
can you just sit on your hands and not tap on that desk enough?
Right.
Can you just do the? Can you just do that? And the word
Exactly.
"just" for
Oh
these
yeah.
children is like ish. They don't know what to do with that word "just" because it's never just for them. They have
Yep.
to re-gear like transitions, right?
Yep. Oh
It's
yeah.
so hard to when they just got focused on something, just got into a space of being, and then we say, "Oh, but can you just quickly come over here? It's only 5 minutes," and then they
Yep.
say, "It's going to be forever."
Right. 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 Right.
Because
Yep.
they can't do that nice little flexibility that we have in our nervous system.
Yep. And I'm a huge fan of Mona LeRoux and her book Beyond Behaviors. I'm sure you're familiar with it. If a parent is like, this sounds like my kid, I want to learn more, I highly recommend. She has another book too. I can't think of the name of it, but anything by Mona LeRoux is fantastic. So what types of challenges, scenarios, diagnoses are parents and kids coming to you with? Are they coming and saying like, I have a bad kid, or what are they noticing that brings them to you?
Oh, it's a variety. It's a variety of kids who come. I would say probably the biggest common denominator is behavior and sensory processing. They're there, but we have a separate arm now for reading and writing disorders, a
Mm-hmm.
separate arm for ASD, a separate arm for ADHD and executive, and then a separate arm for sensory processing and dyspraxia. And we've also developed now a separate arm for trauma informed care with
Mm-hmm.
kids who've gone through trauma or have gone through adoption and things don't completely going the way that it needs to. So over the years, we've been able to work out a different assessment and intervention protocol. Whereas before we were sort of putting everybody kind of where we thought they fit.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have that piece. But of course, all of those programs are still very individualized, because that's the beautiful part of a clinical OT is that you have this one-on-one time, that you can afford to the family and to the child.
Because a
Um,
child could come to you with just one of those
oh
things.
yeah,
Or like mine, there's sort of a bigger umbrella of
yeah,
maybe autism, and then all the other things kind of
that's right.
fall underneath.
That's right. That's right. Because they all connect. And so what happened was that, my husband used to say, "Ma, can't you just focus on one thing?" Because that's the kind of thing that he
Oh no,
does.
you and
He's like,
I,
"It's not."
we're the same person. We can't just do one thing.
So I said to him, but they all relate, because
Mhm.
if I have a child with ASD, they often have attention problems too.
Yes.
But do they have a true attention deficit? Right? So that's a question that I think a
Right.
lot of professionals still have to answer. If I
Mhm.
have a child with dyspraxia, are that also going to show some autistic traits because they may play with things lining up because they can't figure out how to sequence and how to use a motor plan around the toys, right? So there's so much interrelatedness that I said to him, how on earth can I separate them?
Right.
But I do think that there's a different space of work that needs to be done. And as we figured it out from one intensive program to another, how we want to kind of look at this type of profile a little bit differently than that one, and then also in that still do individualization.
Mhm.
It just became easier, right? Because there were things we were doing that was too much for a certain profile, but too little for another profile. And we had to really clinically test until we found a place where I think we're relatively okay now. We're always learning new pieces to go with it. It's not a one size fits all. It's not that here we go with a sensory issue and now we're going to deal with auditory defensiveness and that's it. Auditory defensiveness can come from an emotional anxiety piece. It can come from an attachment piece. It can come from a piece of I have performance anxiety. So when I'm performance anxious, all my systems go into high alert. And so knowing how they cross over, like dyspraxia, often those kids have trouble learning to read. It
Mhm.
has an overlap in the timing piece of dyspraxia into the reading decoding.
Right.
So I try to the best of my ability to explain to my husband, we can't, okay? We have
Right. And
to
if you did
connect the
separate
dots
it,
for
I mean, I
family.
think the kids would not benefit as much. Like,
That's
it's
right.
even as a parent, it's such a relief to hear that there's maybe one place or one
Yeah,
person where everything, like, you could pull back and look at the big picture, because we're so accustomed to going, five different places. And particularly when it's through the school or through insurance, they can only hone in on whatever
that's right.
they've been asked to look at. But
That's
if
right.
there's something else going on, that's frustrating as a parent. So can you walk us through a real life scenario, maybe one that you make up or one that you can remember, um, kind of from like evaluation through intervention through to the end result? Maybe a child who was exhibiting, bad behavior. I hate to use that word, but I'll use what probably often comes to you. Bad behavior according to parents and teachers. Like, what did the underpinning turn out to be? What was the end result of the interventions?
Um, Wish there's so many. I mean, this is 23 years in the
It's a good
making.
problem to have.
But it's always fascinating, you know. I mean, every case still now is like a new case, you know, a new situation, because there's so much more coming to light now. We have screen time now, which we, 10 years ago wasn't so big as it is now. There's always these other influences coming up that helps us to change our game. But I think parents usually call in, and then we do a very extensive intake call with them. We have several questions we want answered. We type them up as they talk to us on the phone. And we want to really get a picture of where are we a good fit, number
Mm-hmm.
one, right? Like parents who really want to do more like ABA type of therapy, we can then at that intake call say, you know what, there's some really good people we can refer you to, but this is not what we do,
Right.
right? So we want to sift out which ones will really fit into our program that we can do well. And then once we've done that intake call, we usually sort of say to the parent, okay, this is the kind of route I think we can take. We can either do a reading or writing combined evaluation with an OT and a speech, or I think we should rather do something to speak to the attention deficit of your child and figure out what the underpinnings are for that reason. And then we have them think about it and they can call us back. So
Mm-hmm.
usually that's the process. So I'm thinking of this one kid that he had an ASD type of profile, but he had much more dyspraxia than actually the ASD, because he could really have theory of mind. He had perspective of taking. The kind of core things that you see with social was available to him.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a lot of sensory issues, and they came out in sensory stim behavior, and probably one of the reasons why they gave him the ASD diagnosis. So we decided for this family, we'll put you rather, I think the dyspraxia sensory processing evaluation will be a better fit. They decided to go ahead. Then when they decide to go ahead, we spend some long time on the phone with them, where we put on a journey. And in the evaluation already, the journey is laid out from the evaluation. And there's several options for evaluation. They can do shorter or longer evaluations, or they can do observational sessions. There's always some individualization taking place depending on the family need. And then they come in for the evaluation consult. And then we go over the evaluation with them and we give them a roadmap of at least the first 6 to 8 months. And we tell them, okay, this is the kind of program that I think will be good. There's, even though we want you to know the fuller picture, we may change the picture as we go because we want to stay individual to your child. And we can't always predict exactly where we want to go. But usually we're pretty spot on because of all the years of working with it. Um, and then we put out times of consultation with the families. We always work on give us feedback and let us tell you what is happening. It's not sort of a blind piece of we're just following a program and we're seeing what we're going to get. Every step of the way, there's a consult and there's a time of us getting together, a time of deciding should we go ahead with this, should we do this, how do we plan to make this happen. And all the while, the family is sort of giving us what's happening at school, and giving us feedback so that it's an organizational place of a meeting of the mind, so to speak. And we also videotape some sessions that we edit for the families and we send it home to them with my face coming up and I'm talking about their child and they can see the things that I'm looking at as an OT, simply because we want them to be informed. It's so important for us. Our mantra, the total approach, is equipping the child, empowering the parent. We want the parent to know, you know what you needed to know. You know what you know now that you didn't know then, right? It's that piece that's so important for us. So then we take this journey together. And there are things that we just don't know that parents do know. And there's things that parents don't know that we know. And so we get together and then we say, let's journey with your child and let's take them every step of the way and support them. And the journey could be intensive work, it could be weekly work, it could be home programs, because some of our programs can be done easily at
Yes, it
home.
is
It
highly
could be
personalized.
center based. There's a lot of versatility.
Yeah. And you do have the ability, ideally, a family's coming to the clinic and it's hands
Oh
on.
yeah,
But I did see on your website, you do have some, like you said, ability to
yeah,
help at a distance, I guess,
that's right.
depending on the situation and the intervention that is needed.
That's right. Yeah, we have kids in almost all states. We have
Mhm.
families that we follow. So the we can't do therapy across state lines yet because of licensure, but we can consult and we
Okay.
can do like video reviews. So we
Hmm.
can do that piece. But the therapy, then we try and work with one of their local therapists, to become part of their team when it's out of state or out of our jurisdiction.
Excellent. I will, for sake of time, I want to have you back again to talk about all the unique things that you offer at your space: Tomatis, interactive metronome, DIR floor time, reflex integration. I think most of us don't know what those what those terms mean and what those interventions look like. So let's table that for a future conversation.
No
But for
problem.
today, what is one thing that you've learned on this journey of supporting children, that maybe we haven't touched on yet, that you just want parents to hear as soon as they can hear it, as early as you can get it to them?
Go slower to go faster.
Mm,
This is so important. This is probably the thing I have to say the most in every consult that I do, even the mentoring of the therapist that I do. It is, of course, we as parents are worried about our child's future. Of course. I would have been very worried if you weren't. It's and that catch up game that we train you to think that way. We tell you your child is 2 years delayed in this and 3 years delayed in that and 5 years delayed in this, and you look at that and you're like, how am my
mm-hmm,
child going to catch up? But remember that as we are worried about the future, today is the scaffold for tomorrow. So if we can harness today to the best possible ability, we are looking at a better future.
mm-hmm,
So for this, that anxiety that takes us into the future, how my child's going to do in tests, how is he going to get married one day, what's he going to hold a job one day, right? That anxiety, see if we can sort of pull back a little bit and stay in the moment, stay to go slow. Because when we do that, the child has a scaffold on which they can build that tomorrow we want to see.
Oh, I love that so much. I could listen to you all day. I know I always say to my families, it's similar, I think, but I'm gonna steal your line. Go slower to go faster. With potty training, it's very common for parents to say, like, I don't want to use the little potty. I don't want to have it in the room where my child is. I want them to just learn it the way it's going to be in the end. They leave the room, they go to the bathroom, they use the big toilet, because then we won't have to make changes along the way.
Yeah,
And hey, some kids can learn like that. And if they can, go for it. But for a lot of kids, it's kind of like being at the playground and wanting to climb the ladder, and they just can't reach that first rung. So as much as you might say, like, just right, just climb the ladder. If we don't give them a boost to that first rung, or even add a rung, they're not going to get there. So we have to
that's
kind
right.
of bring it down to their level so they can master it, so that they can then move to the next one. And that sounds a lot like what you're saying. Again, easier said than done, but really, really important for parents to hear. That was fantastic. And that is a gem of wisdom we have not shared yet. So I hope that someone finds it very helpful. Maude, thank you so much for joining me. Listeners, I'll be back soon with more stuff that I and others wish we knew sooner. In the meantime, I will leave you with my list that I always share of stuff I've learned the hardest way: accept help when it's offered, ask for it when it isn't, if you need it. You are the expert on your child, so trust your gut. And as always, if you need to be the squeaky wheel. Thank you so much, everyone. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye bye.